I usually enjoy having these conversations, and my role today would be that of a moderator. And why that particular role? It's because we look forward to having a discussion, meaning that everyone has an opinion, they have a point of view, they have a perspective, and that perspective matters and will add to the discussion as well. So it's not a classroom setup, meaning that experts speaking to students, but it's having a discussion and a conversation. But of course, the center of the conversation will be the book as introduced. So to introduce myself again, my name is Ben Owden, and I will be moderating this conversation. I am a leadership development trainer and coach. In simplified terms, that means that I help organizations build leaders that inspire conviction, commitment, and congruence in pursuit of a common mission. And the center of our discussion today will be this. For those of you who've read the book, in the beginning pages of the book, there's this line, which I'm sure if you are African and you've lived in Africa or lived anywhere in the world, you've heard of this before, right? This is the paradox of Africa. Africa is richly endowed, yet poor. And that statement is usually reflected in every sense of the word, meaning that be it natural resources, be it manpower, however you look at it, Africa is richly endowed, yet poor. So where do we go from there, right? And in terms of what steps we need to take, I would like to quote from the foreword, and these are the words of Balozi Ombeni Sefue, where he says, "We need to get our priorities right, unlocking the potential of our people and resources in our own continent if we must achieve the Africa we want." And that will be the basis of our conversation today. And so to have this conversation, I would like to just take a minute or two to introduce our guest speaker. And so to have this conversation, we are joined by an international consultant and policy advisor with nearly 4 decades of experience, which includes the private sector, the public sector, and social sectors. She has visited over 1/3 of the African countries and beyond, which means she's qualified to speak on this particular topic, and has proven success in aligning strategy, structure, people, policies, and systems to optimize individual, organizational, and systemic performance in executive, non-executive, and advisory roles. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lucy Newman. Dr. Lucy, karibu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Owen, and thank you to everybody. I would like to say nawasalime wote hapa. Asante kwa mwaliko wa Ngozi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I greet all, and thank you for the invitation to Ngozi. For those of us who are French speaking, I'll say bon après-midi. Merci pour l'invitation à Ngozi. For those of us who speak Hausa, I would like to say barka da rana, nagode da gayyatar zuwa Ngozi. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you all. My high regards to Mr. Singo, the CEO, I think, and then Ambassador Mbeni Sefue, I call my big brother. I'm very delighted to be here this afternoon. I look forward to our conversation, and I know it's going to be a very rich discussion. And in all things, we should look at life, and now they're showing me Professor, I'm sorry, I missed your name, Professor Mkumbo. Good to see you, sir. And I look forward to your conversation. I checked for your videos online. A lot of them are in Swahili. I just found 2 that were in English. So I look forward to hearing from you in English this time around. You're very active as an MP, and you presented some very, very serious issues in Tanzania. I look forward to hearing from you. So for me, this afternoon is wonderful. Thank you, my dear sister, Professor McKinney. I'm looking forward to listening, but I just want to give us maybe like 7 key things about the book. Just like my big brother, Ambassador Sefue, said, it's more than a book. It's a manual. And I'm also happy to tell us that our other senior brother, Professor Pielo Lumumba, has had the privilege of reading this book. I sent him a copy in Nairobi, and he read it, and he gave his feedback. I will not say what his feedback is so that it will not influence the discussions of this afternoon. So the book is also a do-it-yourself book. I am a consultant, and many times, why did I take that approach? I took that approach because many of our books just analyze the issues, bring out the issues, And then you're left hanging. What do I do? And, in Africa, we've always had issues of implementing things. So I'm also a performance improvement consultant, and part of it is to get people to do what they ought to do willingly by themselves, chosen by themselves, so that they can own whatever they come out to do. So that's why you will see sections of the book that are like a manual for you to draft your own path, so that you take the concept from the book, or whatever actions you take, you actually own it. Then I also took it as a discussion with the author. Many leaders are very lonely, and also because in Africa, we assume that the person that is the leader has all the knowledge, but that's not true. And sometimes to keep the appearances is very difficult to say, I'm vulnerable in this place. So I wrote the book like a discussion. My intention actually was like, if you leave on a flight, 5-hour flight or 6-hour flight, or you're on a train ride, or you took a bus ride, and you were sitting next to me, and over the 5 hours, we had a conversation. By the time we arrive at our destination, you should be about finishing that book. That was why I also recommended that if one wants to read it, you start the first part, and then you read The Lion's Gaze. I took The Lion's Gaze because the African lion is well known and all that. So that's one of the issues. Third one is that I took a busy leader in context. I've related with so many leaders. Many leaders, if you don't say what you want to say in the first 5 minutes, you've lost them. And sometimes they look at a book, and if it is very intellectual with a lot of technical language, you lose them. So I try to be as practical as possible and avoid the consulting cliches that we normally use. And I wanted it to be conversational and to make the easy to apply. The other side is that those two concepts, I've used them over the years. And sometimes I've come forward and suggested it to people, like the SWOT plus. We all know SWOT, but SWOT tends to leave us at a cliff edge. Okay, I've gotten my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then what next? So the SWOT plus extends it into prioritization and then even allocation of resources. Prioritization, because we have so many contesting needs and we need to prioritize them in context of our peculiarity. So I didn't want to take like, okay, prioritize people, prioritize ourselves, analyze it ourselves. Then the other side is the ED for SP, which is design for sustainable performance. Entity design in terms of, I broke the genes of entity. Most of the time, when we talk about entity, we think of inanimate object, like a country or an institution. But I brought the issue of an individual as an entity. Ourselves were an entity. And I took the leader on a personal level. I took the leader on a national level and on the continental level, national, jurisdictional level. Many people come to leadership by technical skills. You grow within their space, and then voila, you're in charge of people and you're in charge of the system, and then you're flat-footed. So I started, because we find so many leaders, they might have the technical skills, but don't have the leadership skills. And bringing that all together is very important to achieving the objective. And I also took if you look in the book, I took a Pan-African view. I'm the author from Nigeria, but there's nothing about Nigeria in the book, apart from some personal examples that I gave, which were very, very few. And if you don't read line by line, you might never pick those examples. But I picked the examples, the continental, in such a way that I'm seeing myself in two places. So maybe Lucy 1 and 2. So I picked the examples continental. For instance, the individual is a Ugandan living in Los Angeles. So he's a diaspora person. And the country, the company I picked, a company registered in Egypt, the stock exchange, but with subsidiaries in 5 locations. Look at those 5 locations, all of them on African map. They're all over the place. And some of them are Francophone, Anglophone, Arab, and English. So that's part of it. And in line with that also, I'm going to the 6th point. The takeaways, I looked at all the 3 levels of being individual, organizational, and country. And I made sure that the takeaways were not too many. And if you look at the way I recommended that the book be read, you can choose the section you want, but the first part is advisable that we all read so that we can come to the same understanding. For takeaway, as I wrap up on this my presentation, is that I looked at, I've related with a lot of diaspora people, and I've looked at what the countries are doing with the diaspora. We're tracking diaspora inflows. But diaspora voting is still a discussion in Africa, and some of the countries are they're related with the diaspora. I see giving them opportunity to vote is a favor. It's actually a right. You know, if I must invest my hard-earned money in the home country, I should have the liberty to influence and be participant in the process of choosing leaders. The other side is because of my background in corporate governance, I know that governance at the institutional level and at the national level are very important. And if countries have frameworks, it's likely this issue we have in Africa about strong leaders. And but if we have frameworks that work and are known by everybody, the leader will be conditioned by that. You know, we all know of a global leader that was having issues about strong personality, but because the country has systems, a strong leader was kept in check and has been kept accountable. But in a situation where you don't have frameworks and systems that are codes for governance, whether as a country or an entity or something, that will be a problem. Then I also speak about the constitution. Some of our African countries have constitutions that are 30 years old. Agenda 2063 came on 2013, and up to now we still have, it's like asking somebody with a broken leg to run a marathon. The structure on which, if we look at ED for SP, the mandate, the structure and all are important for the things we aspire for. Sometimes our visions and our aspirations do not take context of whom we are, how we are, what is the baseline that we're starting from. So finally, also the issue of Africa connecting Africa and the issue of data was very important in this process. For instance, there was a time I had a project and I wanted to know all the stock exchanges in Africa, how many listed entities, what's the capitalization. I needed to go to each of the stock exchanges. I even went to the African Stock Exchange Association. I thought there I would get all the integrated data. It wasn't live. And if we cannot get our stock exchange data for the continent integrated for somebody to just look and come up with the demographics, how can we go around, you know, those buckets? And then even the estimates about African population, about percentage of youths, we don't have data. So data is very important. And most of the places where some countries that choose to have census, they focus on elections, you know, census for political power, not census for government to provide services to the people. Then, because I work with the group called the African Private Sector Summit, most of our discussions on the regional economic blocks, we take up the bureaucrats and the politicians and the public office holders to such conversations which have implication on the quality of life of people and the performance of the private sector. And we don't take along the private sector, not knowing that the private sector is actually very important as an engine for growth, and it's from the private sector. Because our private sector in Africa is almost incapacitated, we tend to look externally for funding for some of our things. But if we look internally, our private sector is very well in generating those resources and building capacity on a sustainable basis. So those are the issues that I listed. And as I wrap up, I want to do a little bit of author bragging that I was surprised, you know, when I wanted to publish this book, I chose the publishing house to be the publisher. I didn't want to go the self-publishing path because I was touching on very sensitive issues and I wanted an independent assessment of quality. So I took a publisher in the US. I wasn't so scared of that because my doctoral program was in the university in the US and I know what I went through with my review board and all the things I had to go through. So when I took the publisher, one of the conditions was that you pass the book through a pleasure test. I said, okay, no problem. When the result came out, I was very excited about what the publisher had. And the publisher gave me a very good team, which I'm very grateful for. And I was also so happy about the result of the plagiarism test that came back that 98% of the issues in the book were new information. Only 2% is existing knowledge. And the 2% that is existing knowledge were adequately cited. So the book came back with a score of 98% on originality, and the threshold for innovative things and originality is 97. So the book scored 1% higher than the global threshold, on which note I was really, really very excited because the book took me 3 years to write. It took me 3 years to write because I had to test some of the issues. So since this is about a book review, I look forward to hearing from all those who have read the book, who are in the room. And I really look forward to very objective feedback because my intention is, as I have opportunities to present the book to other audiences, I would like to take along all the feedback that I have as a means of improving the presentation. And if there's going to be another edition, those suggestions will be taken on board. But above all, I really want to acknowledge Ongozi Institute for what is going on. I'm very excited about the work of Ongozi because I know Africa, we have issues of leadership and it's very deep. And I was very happy to see the issue of personal leadership and organizational leadership being taken care of at Ongozi. And even though Ongozi stays in Dar es Salaam, I see it as a continental institution that as the years go by, we'll have many of the parliamentarians, ministers, and all that actually with Ongozi having taking part in their induction processes across the continent, so that Agenda 2063 will be more realistic, and then the African continental free trade will also be easier to achieve. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from the audience online and in the library. And I also look forward to hearing from Professor Mkumbo. And my regards to the CEO and to the chairman and members of board and the members of management of Ongozi. This is not a vote of thanks, but I will give a vote of thanks later. Now I would like to listen. Thank you. Mr. Owen, it's good to see you. I actually saw some of your videos online and you are a very good host.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for that introduction on the contents of the book. Now, I would like to begin by taking a few steps back and to go back to a younger version of Dr. Lucy. Hopefully at that time you were not Dr. Lucy yet, you were just Lucy. Are there events or people in your upbringing, be it childhood or adolescent years, that played a role in instilling this fire and this conviction you have about Africa as a whole? And if there are people or events that played that role, can you share some of those stories with us?
Thank you very much. Thank you. One event, I will share that in terms of the people in my life. The first person is my late father. He was a nurse. He studied nursing in the UK. He certified as a registered nurse. One of the first things he gave me was looking at people beyond the color of their skin. He told me while I was a little girl, I think he was trying to build my confidence to look at people beyond the skin. He said, my middle name is after his mother. His mother was called Miti Surhyel. So my middle name is his mother, and he's the youngest child of his mother. So you can imagine the relationship. I'm a daddy's girl. So he said, do you know that when a patient is in the theater and they've covered the patient with the theater cloth and the person is going to go through an organ transplant, that by the time the specialist comes to replace the organ, that the surgeon would have opened up the skin and clipped it, and the patient would be under the green theater cloth. That unless the surgeon, the organ specialist, looks at the patient's card, that at that time, they will not be able to tell whether it's a white man, it's a black man. Under the skin, we're all the. So that gave me confidence to look at people. And he said, if you really look at all the races very well, you find out that the shapes of human beings are similar across the races if you don't look at the, the skin. So my father gave me that confidence of going beyond the race, beyond the color of the skin, and seeing the other human being and relating at a par. The other person that also influenced my perspective is my mother. She was a very good people person. She had a way of relating with high, the mighty, and through it all, she was very authentic and relates with people. And she said, people just want something. They want to do very well, they want to be recognized. And that helped me not to, I don't flatter, and I can confidently give a negative feedback, but also uh, I recognize people beyond their status. And sometimes I found this to be a great skill. And I found it also so that naturally brought me into the human performance thing, because she was a female leader. She was in charge of so many women groups in the church, and she related with people. And my parents were leaders. So we had all kinds of people coming to our house. And that is how we related with people. And he said, we're all belonging to he who made us all on earth. So the only difference is that we all have different. The other person, while I was doing, as I left home to work and to school, far away from home, were my guardians. The wife was my first cousin, the husband was my second cousin. They gave me an understanding of what it means to step out of the house. And it was in their house I saw white people come to lunch. And I remember I went to my cousin and I said, auntie, these white men are coming to lunch. What are we going to give them? We're giving them our food. I was like, we're giving them our food. Can they eat it? She said, of course they'll eat it. If they can't eat it, they can buy another one when they leave, and that gave me another dimension. So when I went to the university, I also have, my parents believed in mentorship. They introduced us to our uncles and our aunties. When they know the area that you're looking at, they'll just take you to this uncle that is in that area and say, this is my child, teach her how to grow. So for me, my mother took me to one of my uncles who was a cousin. He was in the financial system after I graduated. And that was where I was just entering the system when they packed all the books on treasury and everything, and I had to go through it. The other person I also met at the university was my professor. She was a Caribbean. She was married to a Nigerian. Her name was Dr. Joan Owasike. And that was where I saw female intellectuality at work, balancing her family life and also being supportive in society. She was supporting many charitable works, and she ended up working at the Commonwealth. She's a very strong lady, but very intelligent. So these are the people. And then my children have helped me to remain very young. I ask questions a lot. I relate with them sometimes as a parent, sometimes as a friend, and sometimes I just behave like a friend who's going out with them. And they have helped me to remain like IT savvy and know all the young millennials. Two of them are millennials, and I have Gen Z and all that. And then my husband also, whom I will introduce later in this process. Apart from that, I've had very good places to work. I've had leaders almost in every place that I have worked. One of my uncles, who was a mentor, said, if you want to work anywhere, whatever your level is, imagine you are the CEO and take your responsibility. And if you do like that, you would work well. So I found myself asking questions and also stepping forward to support my sisters. If you support people to grow, you will naturally be growing. But if you step on people, then you don't have a supporters club. So that is part of it. Even some of my mentors are online, and some of them are not going to be available today because it's a work day, and they've asked for the recording that they don't want to miss this session. And just like I said, the person who forward Ambassador Mbeni Sefue, who were on a project in Namibia, and he was a very, very engaging person. He used to tell stories and he used to ask questions. And because I didn't used to be scared of people, sometimes we're at breakfast and he's the only one on the table. I just walk up to him. I said, "Good morning, sir. What are you having? Sunny side up. How does it taste?" And other people will be looking at me that I've approached this leader and all that. So, as they say in Africa, it takes a village to raise a child. That actually comes true in my life. I know I've mentioned some people, but there are many, many more. So what I will say to very young people is every opportunity you get, it doesn't have to be financially beneficial, especially if it gives you opportunity to learn, even if it's for free, take it. And also everybody who has been a part of your journey, when you get there, don't forget those on whose shoulders you stood up on. It's not about not questioning them. Question them respectfully, ask them questions. But if you do it with respect and a curious mind, most leaders are eager to answer your questions. And those questions, treasure them, take them as a gift, and use them. And as you grow, take along other people with you. Is the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. And he's African, and it's okay to be like that. So it takes a village to raise. There are so many people that have contributed to the Dr. Lucy Newman you see today. My children, my husband, my uncles, my aunties, my parents, mentors at school, and bosses at work. And some of them are even colleagues. And it's not always somebody who is higher than the hierarchy that you learn from. That security man at the gate, you'll be surprised. Say hello, good morning. Are you okay? What's wrong with your face today? And you'll be surprised. This person might have some deep wisdom that you, the graduates, hold. You may not even have that wisdom. So honor people, cherish the moments we have. And when you are up there, remember those on whose shoulders you stood on. It doesn't mean patronizing or being a victim to them. It's about celebrating yourself and also celebrating that you didn't reach there by yourself, but so many people invested in you. Thank you very much, Mr. Owen. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that response. Now, in the book, you speak about this concept of transformational leadership as a leadership approach that will be useful to drive Africa to this Africa, to the Africa that we want. And part of being a transformational leader is being value driven, meaning that there's a set of values that drive your behavior. And leaders who are driven by values tend to have or lead from a place of deep purpose and commitment. Now, my question to you is, what are some of the values that contribute to your sense of deep purpose and commitment towards this mission, especially because you're not just thinking about yourself, you're not just thinking about your family and your children, but your heart beats for Africa. And that's not necessarily typical. Most people would only think and concern themselves with their own business. I'm only looking out for my group. I'm only looking out for my tribe. I'm only looking out for my, those in my immediate circle. So what sort of values drive that behavior? You mentioned there the value of Ubuntu, right? This idea of actually taking into consideration the welfare of even those who are beyond your immediate reach, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Owen, you asked deep questions. All right. So the values. First one is authenticity. Being authentic and being true to yourself is a secret for stress-free life. It takes a lot of stress to present another person that is not real, because you really need to cover up, think of what you did before. But if every time you show up the same person, then you can focus your energy on more progressive issues than trying to manage impressions from people. The other one is, it's okay to be popular. Sometimes because you're different, it might even be your attraction. So most times some people feel you need to blend in, you need to be like other people. No, we're all unique. We all have a role that is expected of us. Mother Teresa said, if everybody swept the front of their house, the whole world would be very clean. So one of the issues is be your authentic self. Then there's this thing about life and nature. Even if you look at the trees, the tree, the leaves fall, and if you don't sweep away the leaves will stay there, they'll decay, they'll form manure. And in a short while, you will see smaller trees growing up. So when we get to grow and we have opportunities, it's not just for ourselves. While not trying to be very, very religious, in terms of accountability, while I was younger, a Christian home, there were two parables in the Bible, the parable of the 10 talents and the parable of the olive tree. And sometimes nature puts us in specific positions because destiny has expectations. Just like us, we put in efforts because we have expectations. That's the same way about nature. And just like if we're not a viable resource, nature has a way of taking away what is. So the success to thriving and doing very well is also not succeeding for yourself and seeing other human beings in that regard and not allowing religion, tribe, and location to limit you. And also the issue of collective support to deal with collective problems. Sometimes elites have the challenge of fixing themselves, fixing their family. But guess what? If you leave that homeless person and that homeless person has no good value, that homeless person will be a security threat to you. So that's also part of why I'm very interested in the International Financial Reporting Standards that requires sustainability reporting in such a way that as a corporate, you will see many of the examples in the book has to do with investing in the environment. Many corporates are not very active in that space in investing in the environment. I've gone to some jurisdiction whereby they have mining or oil exploration, and the host community is in such distress. But if you hear the amount of wealth that is emanating from there, is mind-blowing. So these are some of the issues. And then also not assessing every opportunity in financial terms. Sometimes good things in nature come in very bad packages. And if you're out to just look at the shiny objects, you meet so many opportunities in life. So these are some of the issues. And then contentment is very good. Many of our societies are becoming so financially driven that is really a problem. It's really a problem. And I do that a lot with young people. There's a book that was written by one organization in Nigeria. It's called The First 40 Jobs. And I asked the lady when she asked me to participate and give a chapter. I said, why did you want to do this? She said, because young people want to start working today and tomorrow they want to buy a Lamborghini. So she decided to pick 10 in their lives. So in that story, I spoke about me being the daughter of a lady who went to nursing school and dropped out because she was scared of. She went to the theater room, and when they opened the prison, she collapsed. She had to come back home. So she became a seamstress and a homemaker. And how I supported her as a personal assistant. And there I found out the issue of entrepreneurship, bookkeeping and record keeping for customers. And then my father, when he retired, he opened a pharmacy, which was a first and second level medical care facility. And I was settling his bills with the government, making sure that the drugs that were in the store were not expired and bringing them out. So I understood the issue of governance and accountability and compliance with the rules. When we were very young, my father used to make us watch late night news with him. The older ones that were in senior secondary school have to stay and watch the network news with him. And thereafter, he'll ask you, what do you think? What do you think? So while I was a young girl, I had seen many of the breaking issues politically in my country. And he used to listen to BBC and Voice of Africa with this small transition radio, which if he's sleeping, sometimes he might be snoring, but if you switch off that radio, he said, who put off the radio? I was listening to you. You say, Papa, you were snoring. He said, no, I was not sleeping. So those kind of learning, reading was very important. We used to, and I also have an aunt who was a teacher. She used to teach English. They were my guardians. And when we write her a letter, she would get your letter and she would correct your English and send back your letter to you with an answer. So your first letter is coming back to you corrected with all the grammar, and then she will answer on a second. So it's a lot of different issues, but these have been very helpful. And then the other one I want to speak about is that sometimes bad things happen in life, and our human reaction is to what happened that is bad, go through the trauma. But it's very important to step aside later and ask why this happened, what can I learn from this, and how can I prevent this repeating itself again? And also, when you're recovered, you say, who is going through this now? Based on what I have learned, how can I help that person? I lost my parents my father died when I was in my final year in university. That affected me. I couldn't go back to school on time. As I said, I'm a daddy's girl. My father was very close. I was heartbroken. And then I lost my mother later in life. And as a result of that, I now appreciate also that when our father died, our life did not take a swing too much because we had uncles and aunties who had been involved in our lives and were around us. But so many people lose parents. And as a result of that, their life took on a different trajectory. So one of the works that the beneficiaries don't know me. I chose that. I didn't want them to know me because I wanted them to just be good, keep doing what they're doing and looking up to God, and God will get anybody to take them. But over the years, I've had scholarships for orphans in the past from 1984 to date, more than 30 of them, taking them through school. It's not just once in a while scholarship. I pick them from primary school to they finish 12th grade with some counseling through the years and looking at their report card. I also speak to women who have lost their husbands. That's a very traumatic experience. And many women who have lost their husbands, you see health going down immediately after that because it's a very traumatic issue. And many of our African traditions are not fair to women. Once the husband dies, the woman becomes a suspect. Everybody is fighting her. Meanwhile, she has to deal with children. She has to deal with her own trauma. Society is not fair to women. I also do some work with young ladies in career. I remember when I was younger, you have a lady that is young, very brilliant and bright. I used to say, don't call her brilliant and bright until she has had her first 2 children. She's dealt with motherhood, teaching children, and the first 3 years. And then during that time, the employers need to be very supportive because having children is a natural biological role and is investment in continuity of the society. So I talk to employers about being supportive to women during their childbearing years so that they can remain active in the workspace. And also having children is a contribution to the national development. So these things have been very helpful. And I found even the experiences that I call negative in my life now being used. I've also failed in my school years. I'm not as brilliant as while I was going through secondary school, in my 12th grade, I failed maths. I failed maths and I failed French. When I went to my first year in the secondary school, I had never studied French in my life. And at the end of the first term, my report card came back. During those days, we didn't have digital report card. We had like a transparency, a receipt booklet that they write with, if you pass, you get blue or black ink. If you failed, you write your reports in red ink. So my French teacher, Madame Buko, who has retired, and I'm still in touch with her, because that process has affected me to date. I don't accept failure. Failure is circumstantial. Because I failed my French, I had 25% in my French in my first year in secondary school. And Madam Buko thought I was a weak student. She saw the entire report sheet because she was on holidays before she came back. All my other teachers had filled in their grades. And she saw that I was getting A and B in other subjects. And I had, if there's anything more than F, I got it in French because it was 25%. She was very angry and she called me to the staff room and asked me, why did you fail my subject? I told her I've never seen French in my life. I didn't know what French was all about. She told me, okay, French is just about the tenses, the gender. I found it very funny that inanimate objects had gender. She said all those things and she made me understand. And at the end of my first year in secondary school, I got 2 prizes on the speech and practice day. The other prize was the most important. The second prize was the best student in French. That was really most improved because from 25% to the best prize student at the end of the year. But that singular experience showed me that many of the people we write off in society today, they would have been very good. They had better circumstances. And that also helps me to judge people with mercy. As human beings, we normally judge people from where they're coming from and where they are presently. I try as much as possible to advocate for us judging people from their potential state, where they can be, how we can participate in lifting them from this level to the next level. The other one is I failed maths. I failed maths because we had a teacher that taught us in the 3rd year in secondary school. That teacher was a bad maths teacher, and we didn't like the teacher. So most of us in my set, by the time we were in the 5th year, we all failed maths. And I went to my college and I wanted to read social sciences, and they told me I cannot read social science. I had to go and read pure arts because I failed maths. I said, no, I want to read social studies. So the person said, the registrar said, for you to read that, you have to take your maths, otherwise we'll hold your credentials. I said, fine, no problem. That was a good challenge. I love challenges. So I studied very hard and I passed my maths, and then I was able to go into the social sciences. And guess what? Maths, I later worked in the financial system. I got to advise financial institutions, and I did so well in that space. And now, if you give me a balance sheet or anything, statement of financial affairs, I will digest it, and I'm looking at IFRS. So why am I saying that? Things can be bad now. It doesn't have to be bad forever. It depends on our attitude to the issues, and we can use those things to come back, and we can conquer those things. And because we have conquered, we are now very good role models for people who are going through that, and we can pull them up. So in that case, our experience was actually training for us to become an army dealing with those issues in society. Thank you, Mr. Owen. I'm talking too much.
No, thank you for the response. I particularly liked what you said there, right? Learning to see the potential people have versus how they appear in the present moment. And I think having that lens of seeing potential, not just in people, but in circumstances, in systems, in communities of people, I think when you see potential, then it's much easier to engage beyond what you're currently seeing as well. Now, there's a portion towards the end of the book where you list 10 questions as an assessment tool of sorts for leaders. And as I read through the questions, all 10 of them start with the 3 words: do you care, do you care, do you care? And I started, wondering, because care is such a loaded word. And care is an emotion. It's an affective word. And I know right now, because your target audience are Africans in Africa and in the diaspora, there may be a group of people who say, I honestly just don't care. I don't care about the larger, and for many reasons. And I think I'll just use one particular. There are people who are maybe frustrated by the political structures in their context. There are people who feel like, I just don't see a way out. I just don't see how this will work, because to get to the Africa that we want, all sectors have to come together. And that sometimes can feel like the battle of David and Goliath, so to speak. So to the young person who's in this state of apathy, saying, I don't care, I don't really see any hope, right? What can you say to that young person? And at the same time, we're just coming to the end of the first 10 years of this Africa that we want, right? That goal. And we're about to launch the next decade of working towards that future. What kind of leader will be effective in really pushing this needle forward in the next 10 years?
Thank you, Mr. Owen. When you were speaking about the young people, I was wondering, I have some of them in my family. Yeah, my nieces, my cousins, my second cousins, and my children. And I also come from my country. We just had our election. I also watched the NSAS, and I watched the Arab Spring, which is that. I've seen some of the conflicts in Kenya. I've seen some of the issues in South Africa. And I understand for us, Africa is a very young continent. By 2050, I've also seen the issue of, in Nigeria, we call it Japa, fleeing the country and going abroad to develop countries. And about 2-3 weeks ago, presented a paper to institute directors because of the turnover they were having about young people leaving the country, mostly to the OECD countries, 38 of them, and also to some of the partners, which includes our own South Africa. They are justified their anger because the conversation was going on with one of my uncles. We were just having a conversation, and he was reminiscing on when they were students and they used to serve them quarter of a chicken, they do their laundry in the university, they do that. While we were speaking, his daughter left the room. That time she was like 32. So when I was leaving, I said, "You left the room and I'm about to go. Why did you leave the room?" She said she was depressed because that life that the father was recounting, she can't relate with it. And she's angry with everybody who was in authority that did not make sure that she can now benefit from those privileges of those years. So the young people are right in thinking like that. The only thing is that also in their engagement, the older people seem to, in terms of communication, the older people seem to sugarcoat the situation and not say it in terms of trying to be politically correct. Younger people don't have issues with expression. They're very direct in their communication and they want to have a sense of purpose. So it's up to us, the political leaders and the corporate leaders, to find means of engagement with them. There's an interview I gave one of the magazines, which I hope will be made available. Mr. Nchimbi has it. And I was also invited to the Pan-African Trade and Investment Conference in Sacramento. I also gave a brief remark, which I made available to Ngozi, that our leaders need to find ways of discussion, showing empathy, engaging them, making sure that for them, transparency is very important. Engagement is very important, and negotiating the issues and the priorities is very important. Otherwise, we stand to lose them to living abroad. And some of our diaspora people, as you said, they are disengaged. And many of the diaspora people that we have now, we have this joke, we say Africa's sixth region. We have 5 regions in the continent, but there's a 6th region, which is the diaspora community. And some of them are really, really disengaged and they're very unhappy because of what is happening, justifiably so. So one of the things we need is the issue of engagement with them. And unfortunately, many of our diaspora associations need to be revived. And I have also addressed the issue of the African Union Commission and the African Union in terms of framework for engagement of the diaspora as we move in the direction of our Agenda 2063. The first 10 years, we have a few wins, but it has been very slow. The next 10 years, we need to take jet speed. And one of the things is serious engagement and investment in our young people. These young people are also very super creative and innovative. So in our leadership, I'm very happy to see in this room, I was looking at the pictures and I was very happy. I saw some people that are young people, so seniors, is a very diverse audience. And I truly commend Ngozi for that. And I commend some of the African countries. I've been to some parliaments and I've seen in a parliament, I've seen a 24-year-old and I've seen an 8-year-old. in parliament, and they're all members of parliament. Let's have that diversity and engage them in the process, because otherwise, if we don't have them participating, when we're not there, they wouldn't have had the mentorship of how things would be. And our diaspora community, many of them, we should not just ask them for money. Many of them are skilled. They can give us pro bono services as a means of mentoring and support. Then the other thing is that the realistic issue is that we have a lot of young people, and 60% of our young people are unemployed. And we all know that we cannot provide jobs for them. It's not possible in the next 5-10 years. So we really need to take a fast lane in engaging them, giving them opportunities to participate, and also giving them the opportunity to develop their skills and travel if they need to travel, but keep them engaged while they are away, so that while they are away, they would remain engaged with the country and they can stay connected. Because if they live angry like that, we don't have data on them. The diaspora committees and the things that the countries have need to see these diaspora people as customers, just like you provide services. But what we do now is almost see them as a source for diaspora remittances. When I had a session I presented where I used the example of Philippines and Mexico. Philippines has law whereby they have an agency that keeps all the details of the diaspora people. They support them in living. They support them in getting skills. While they are there, they engage them. They help their families settle. And when they want to come back, they re-engage them. Mexico has 3 times, which is like the diaspora people are in clusters of municipalities and settlements abroad. And when they have projects at home, when they remit an amount, the municipalities, the federal, they multiply it by 3 and invest in the municipalities. So they have become partners in the, and there's a lot of engagement. So the issue about immigration, if we look at human history, we've seen it before. And then now in Africa, between last year and this year, we have 12 countries that will be having elections. That means by 2024, we'll have a cohort of new leaders at the parliaments and at the presidencies and even down to the provinces in 12 big countries in Africa. 12 out of 54, that's a large number. However, if we do that right, and in the second block, this is the beginning of the second block of Agenda 2063, the 10 years, if we do it right, it means we might actually have the kind of cohort that we had of Kwame Nkrumah, Tafawa Balewa, Kaunda, and all the people that have led to the independence of the African countries from 1960 to 1965. But however, if we miss it, that will be a lost decade. And if we make the most of it, engaging the youth, these youth that we see them now, our millennials and our Gen Z, the future MPs and all that we have. Some of them already, the millennials, are MPs, they are males, So that engagement is very important. I sincerely hope that Africa doesn't miss this window. And the beautiful thing about COVID is an equalizer. When COVID came, by some special things, Africa didn't suffer from COVID as much as the OECD countries. And many of them are just recovering from their problems. And we in Africa, we almost have summer all year round. Even our winter is actually like spring. So I hope, and that is one of my advocacy, I will sing it on the hilltops, that our political leaders need to be held accountable. And I will support the young people in screaming and crying for attention in a very constructive manner for engagement. And I would also encourage the uncles, the aunties, and the brothers and the mentors to really allow these people come alive, explore their creativity. And I watched the ADB annual conference, and I watched the Afrexim annual conference, and I was very happy. I also watched the Africa CEO Forum. Great things are happening in Africa, but I think African Union and African Commission need to put on a new thinking hat. There's one thing that I found very humorous. African Union has a beautiful flag and a fantastic anthem. So when I asked about the anthem, I was told that the anthem is only played in some special occasions when some special people from the union are around. I was like, what is that? That anthem is fantastic, is inspiring, and I think it should belong to all of us, and we should all be able to play it. When we have an event in our country, we should fly our national flag, we should fly the African Union flag, we should play our national anthem and play the African Union anthem. That way, it will build the Pan-African way, and then we can stand as a force. I sincerely believe one of my driving forces is that if we have 4 African countries with great potential and doing very well, the fate of the human race would alter because the Black people will have some respect. Even the Maghreb will have some respect. If you look at immigrations, most African countries, since the Arab Spring, they've lost a lot of youth immigrating. So we need to look at that and see how our young people really participate and be brought into it. And we should learn. I know in our African culture, we're very paternalistic, but the young people have access to the internet. They see what's happening outside and they want part of it at home. I remember the story of one lady that is from my country that found herself in Canada. And at the peak of winter, she recorded a video. She was outside, she was shivering, she was cold, and she was cursing. She was cursing all the leaders in the country. She said if she had an opportunity, she would be in this deep freezer. She would have been at home where it's warm and she can eat her vegetable and eat her African food. That is because of bad leadership that she has to be in Canada and suffer from this cold. And you see smoke coming out of her mouth. She's like in a freezer. So most of them, even when I looked at the analysis, I saw that African migration is more within Africa than externally, which was a surprise. And that means that in a period of African continental free trade and where we have the Connecting Africa working very well, it will now be a competition between countries that have stood up and can offer a better quality of life to their people, and they'll be the ones to attract skills. I sincerely hope that our countries will wake up and play the right tunes so that we can get there. So the next block for us, African Agenda 2063, we need logistics, connecting Africa with Africa in terms of movement of goods and services and people. We also need opportunity to give our young people relate. Most of my mentees, I tell them, connect with your local association, try to find a continental association. Because if you don't open your mind to other spaces, you might not know really where the oyster is. And the whole world is your oyster. So find your space, and your space can be anywhere. People are all the same. We want to succeed, we want to relate with one another, and want to achieve, and we want to be healthy and want to be well. So that aspect is what I hope that the African Union, and the African Union, I also seriously suggested that they should come up with, apart from lip service, investing in the private sector. I have a relationship with the African Private Sector Summit, and I know the great things that have the Bill of Rights for the private sector that talks about various conditions for the private sector to work. If you look all over the world, developed economies, it took the private sector transforming and collaborating with the public sector to drive the change. And if that is done, when the private sector is working, that's where the taxes to the government come from, where the government will get the resources. And if the private sector works, its social responsibility projects, working with the social sector, the NGOs, would help us touch the communities. And as touch the community, we are all accountable. Jobs will be created, families will be impacted, and society will be better for it. But if we stay talking ourselves as diplomats, public sector people, it's like having an aircraft with 2 engines flying alone on 1 engine, just like how we moved the gender parity issue. You cannot have 1 gender alone. You have to take 2 gender along. I know there are some continents, when I talk about 2 gender, they will shoot me because they say there's a spectrum. We're Africans, I recognize 2 gender. I apologize for anybody who has a spectrum. I don't know any spectrum. So now there's 2 genders. We have an aircraft with 2 wings. One is a female engine, the other one is a male engine. Then the aircraft flies very well. So gender parity is very important because African women, we're very resilient, we're very hardworking, but we need the support of our husbands, our brothers, and our sons to thrive. and be what we can be. So I'm conscious about the time. I hope I've answered your question very well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now I'll ask you one final question, and then I will pass it on to Honorable Mkumbo, and then he can give his review for that.
Yes.
Now, something that is also captured in a big part of the book is this whole essence of culture. Now, culture is sometimes it can be an abstract idea, meaning what exactly is culture. Yes. But you break it down in the book, and I would like to just spend maybe a few minutes to talk about this, because there's a book that I recently read, courtesy of Uongozi. It's called Why the West Rules for Now by Ian Morris. And technically, it's a book about the history of all the civilization across human history from, when we started recording history. And you see people have different views as to how civilizations emerge and how they disappear. But one thing that all the historians and archaeologists and everyone else who's working in that field, what they agree on is the role of culture. That usually any civilization that emerges and eventually disappears, there is a culture that sustains it. And once that identity is lost, then things start to descend. Now, speaking of Africa, the Africa we want, at all levels, from the family level to the continental level, culture still plays a role, and culture affects the nation as much as the institution. Actually, I think there's even a phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that's used mostly in the business sector. But the power of culture to either help rise something, or really the absence of or the corruption of culture playing a role in the descent of something is still true and critical today. So, speaking of the Africa we want, in most levels, even in government, in private sector, public sector, most people, the roles that they have, especially people in positions of power, they're usually tenure, right? You're given a 3-year contract, you're given a 5-year contract. 2-year contract is quite common practice for a lot of people in the private sector. And when we speak about establishing a culture, that's a long-term project. In the book, you speak about China and their 100-year vision. So knowing that the reality of things is that most leaders who are in positions of influence and power have very short tenures to try and play a role in either sustaining a culture, strengthening a culture, or even launching a new culture. How can we find a good balance between delivering short-term results while keeping an eye on this truth that to sustain whatever changes we are implementing, we will need a culture to sustain it in the long term. But I'm only given 3 years to get all this done, right? So how do I balance between delivering short-term results while still contributing and building a culture that will sustain this in the long term?
Thank you, Mr. Owden. You really read the book. I was smiling because I named people and culture in ED for SPS, dream killers. They're dream killers. And if you look at the SWOT clause, they can end up in the red box in the left-hand side, lower quadrant. So I have dated with leaders, and some of them, one of the first things in my consulting assignment, whether it's with the president or with the CEO, I said, what's your contract? How many more years do you have? I use that to help the leaders, because many times, especially for some of our politicians, they see things to the next election. They see things to the next election. And just like I said in the private sector summit, we also saw this issue of our political parties not having deep philosophies of the parties. So we have so many political parties, unlike in some other countries where we have left, right, and independent. For instance, in my country, there was a time we had 58 political parties, and the politicians cross carpet anyhow, from this party to that. Sometimes they by the next election, they have gone to 2 other parties and all that. So getting the leadership, you need to start thinking about succession planning and also part of the communication. I know some African countries, this is the first time in Africa that we've always been short-term focused. This is the first time in Africa that we had a 50-year plan. And I know sometimes when we talk about it at a session, some people will say, 50 years is too long. What I say, China had 100 years. They had 100 years, they just finished their 100 years, and they have the next 100 years. So what's wrong with having a 100-year plan if you break it into pieces and you're able to take it by block? So in the SWOT clause, that was also a problem for many leaders as I learned about prioritizing what is urgent and what is now later, and what is it that I can do now that will actually snowball into what I aspire to tomorrow. That is a challenge that many of us as countries we have, and also the issue of communication. In Africa, we do a lot of oral communication. We tell stories, which was why I took the storytelling approach to write the book. But if you dissect the stories, most of it is propaganda, some of it is myth. Believe in mythologies rather than realistic. And that's what issues with data. Data does not lie. And if you have data, you do the analytics, is very obvious. So if you're telling me you're doing well, if I look at the data and the data is saying something else, then I can query you, which is what our millennials and Gen Z people are doing, and do crowdsourcing, and they get opinion polls and all that. So one of the things to do is in our engagement of these leaders, if we had parties that were based on philosophy, for you to see that while you're in office now till the next election, you also have an accountability to your party. That is, if your party is based on philosophical foundations that you believe in, and you're not in the party because it's a means to an end. For the executives, whenever they're in their first tenure and their contract has opportunity for renewal, I used to tell them, if you do this very well and you work at it, when it is time to discuss your renewal, then it's no longer a negotiation, it's an obvious next step. So doing that helps them to look long-term. And then also the issue of legacy. I was so happy about the Afrexim 30th anniversary. I noticed that the current CEO had spent 30 years in Afrexim. And you could see all that has happened. And he grew through the ranks. So hitting the role as the CEO, the learning curve was very short. And when we do consultancy for organizations, you can also identify future leaders very early in the process. When I was in PricewaterhouseCoopers, a process that was continental, they bring everybody together as a cohort and they throw a lot of things on people, and they bring out fast track leaders who are usually immediately after that, they put them on mentorship to becoming partners. We need to start investing. That was why I was very happy with the work that Mbonzi Institute is doing about sustainable leadership and sustainability in the continent. And I am also excited about looking at the issue of personal leadership and organizational leadership, because if you have a personal leadership and you can look at the organizational leadership beyond the role that you're occupying now, then you are likely to invest long-term in the organization. But I find something very wrong in our various countries in terms of how we've structured our economy. And I will briefly bring that. I mentioned it briefly in the momentum section and in the jurisdiction section. We all have primary sectors, secondary sectors, and tertiary sectors. These sectors have been there from eternity. We have not been sensitive to emerging issues. And that's part of also why we are losing the hearts and minds of our young people. There's a work that was done that quantified the sectors in a futuristic manner. And I also know that I speak to regulators, and some of them are my clients. They have challenges about regulated governance in some sectors. Because you take a primary sector and you throw in all kinds of industries, see, that's what it is. But this one that has, imagine a situation whereby we have the extractive sector, which is everything you take from the earth, whether it's lumbering, whether it's minerals, whether it's agriculture. Those sectors are called, those industries are all clusters as extractive. Then the second sector is called the secondary sector, which has to do with agro-allied processing, manufacturing, and all kinds of industries, which are translating raw materials into finished products. That's the secondary sector. Then the tertiary sector is the services, whereby you have transport, logistics, finance, banking, legal, and all that. Then you have the quaternary sector, which is the knowledge sector, which has to do with IT, institutions of learning, research, and development in that fourth sector. Then you have the fifth sector, which is the policy sector. They call it quaternary sector, where you have policy-making category across the sectors, leadership, whether it is at the corporate, whether it is at the social, whether it is at the public, at that place. So when you now come out with rules and regulations of engagement, it is easy to develop a governance framework for extractive, where you'll be looking at the EITI, I know, in terms of transparency. And then when you look at the manufacturing, you can look at the source of production, importation of goods, and all the labor issues. When you talk about the services, you can talk about the legality in terms of the legal frameworks, financial services access. Then when you talk about the fourth sector, you can talk about research and development that feeds into the first and the second sector. Then when you get to the fifth sector, issues of your governance, issues of your policy, your social sector, your health, that works. So in that case, most of our young people, they are in the creatives as we are seeing them. But because some of our old people, I hear that a lot with parents. Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a doctor? They say, no, mommy, I'm going into music. I'm going into fashion. It's like, excuse me. There's one guy that said he sent his children to Canada. They came and said, Daddy, we want to be doing tattoo. He said, are you crazy? Do you know how much I spent on your school fees? You want to go into tattooing? So that is a very important next step for us in Agenda 2063. Our industrial clustering should be by economic activities cluster. And then we should think about the governance, because the governance and the processes are not there. Our electioneering processes are funny. Sometimes there's fight, there's war, and all that. So if we're able to clear that, then things would happen, I believe, especially this connecting Africa. If I want to come to Tanzania now, and if I decide, from coming to Tanzania, I want to check on somebody in Nairobi, and it's going to be in Addis Ababa, I will need to work on 3 visa processes because I'm coming from Lagos. But if I was going to Senegal, Dakar, and I was going to Liberia, because of the ECOWAS passport, I can go without any visa process. I look forward to when Africa will be so connected. We need train. I can see that part of it is the connection by the train. Some of the road networks have not been developed. Some of the issues have not done well. But I really, really want to commend the ADB, the AFREXIM, for great work that they're doing in developing Africa. So one of the things I even, somebody said the Bretton Woods system does not work for Africa. I said, yes, of course it will not work for Africa. But ADB and AFREXIM is doing well, but we must make sure that we keep them safe and thriving so that they don't get into fatigue. So it means our respective RECs, regional economic blocks, if we imagine a situation whereby we have development finance institutions, we have insurance and insurance structures within those regional blocks, we'll be helping to open up the economy and allow these things to happen. The other thing is trade. If I experienced that when I published this book and I needed to send to some people in Africa, I wanted to use DHL. And when I was tracking, I was shocked. Thank God that DHL is doing some other innovations across Africa and they pride themselves in that. But when I do the traditional postal services, you know that my package in Nigeria will go to London or go to Dallas before it comes back to Nairobi or go to South Africa. Where our shipping and our packaging processes in the traditional postal services are still linked to the original colonial ties. We need to break loose and think of regional hubs so that African continental free trade can thrive. Otherwise, if I produce a dress in Lagos and I have a customer in Dar es Salaam, that person will be waiting for 1 month to get my package. Or in the alternative, I will have to pay expensively. Let me get there, it will be too expensive for the person and the person will not be interested. So we have African continental free trade, is a good pact, but there are some fundamental issues that we really need to address to be able to achieve the Africa we want. And if we get things right, our young people will turn things around and they will do fantastic things. And I know them because some of them are my children, some of them are nieces, and some of them are my cousins.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you for that answer. And now I would like to invite others to contribute to the discussion. And for those of you who are online, please send in your questions. We already have a question from someone from Malaysia, Prabha. And so if you have a question, please send in your questions on the chat. And for those of you who are here, you can start writing and preparing those questions. Now, I would love to take this opportunity to welcome someone else who's going to contribute to the discussion. He is the former Minister of Industry and Trade, and he is the Member of Parliament currently representing the Ubungo constituency, Honorable Kitila Mkumbo. Karibu sana.
Shukrani. Thank you very much, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to be in this session, but also to read the book, which I found it very riveting. And by the way, through your question and answer session, you have actually reviewed the whole book. So that was quite a very big review already. So I'll just make a few additional comments from the book that I've read, which is titled African Leaders Tête À Tête, Navigating Entity Design and Prioritization of Systemic Outcomes, which has been authored by Dr. Lucy Newman. So the first point I wanted to make is that this book is contributing to ongoing debate, actually, about the role of leadership in individual and society development. And we know that authors have differed very much on this subject. Some authors believe that the problem of Africa is entirely about bad leadership. And I remember when I was reading a book by Martin Meredith, The State of Africa, History of the Continent Since Independence, he almost concluded saying that the trouble with Africa is squarely one, and that is bad leadership. And you may wish not to agree with him, but actually, Lucy's book is centered around this particular theme. And I think that Lucy's book is very important for people who want to understand leadership from the African perspective, but also it provides very interesting leads on how to develop leadership at various levels. She acknowledges the importance of leadership in achieving individual, organizational, and even national objectives. And she focuses, interestingly, on transformational leadership style. And when I was a student of psychology, I know that we studied several leadership styles. But I know that the transformational leadership style is one of the most effective, but also very difficult to achieve. So the choice of this style is very, very interesting. Because the transformational leadership style actually focuses on two things. I mean, it believes that the leader must be informed and in academic cycles, intellectually alert. That is one side, but the other side is that the leader must see the followers as also contributing to the leadership development, which somehow is antithesis to African leadership context, because in Africa, I think relationship between the leader and the led is almost that, like that one of the parent and the child. So it is a bit didactic that you expect leaders to provide and the followers to receive. So the choice of this leadership style is very interesting, but it is the one which is really needed to move us from where we are. Of course, as a reviewer, we are also very much interested in understanding who is this author. So I've read quite a bit of yourself. I've also watched your videos, very insightful, and I was joking to Professor McKenna saying that, but she seems young, but what? When I read about her experience, you would expect her to be very old, but she's not. So, I mean, a very long history of success. You have worked in all cycles, in the private, in the public, in the social sectors. You have gone to the very high apex of education, having a PhD. You have done quite a number of publications apart from this one. I was also very interested in reading your, I think, this book on this publication, Storytelling, an African Leadership Journey of Performance Improvement Innovation, which is also quite enticing. So, I mean, already you've made quite a name already in your field, but also beyond. Coming back to book again, I think three things that I find quite remarkable from this book. First, it covers the topic of leadership on all levels, from personal level, organizational level, but also on the national level, which you call jurisdictions level. And I think this is unique because most of the book will be referring to maybe organization or politics, but this one is quite impressive, which means that the information that we're having in the book is applicable to anyone looking to become a leader at any level without being very particular. And the second, of course, which makes the book quite interesting in Africa and unique, is the fact that many books we read on leadership, they will be based on very thick theoretical conceptions, very thick scientific jargons. But this one is actually based on the author's practical experiences. So the book makes, this makes the book more relatable and easier to follow. This is not to say that the assertions made in the book are speculative. No, but they're based on experience, practical one. But I like the way you are drawing also from renowned leaders, very successful ones like Prof, Annan, Colin Powell. I think that was very, very useful. The third one, I like these two concepts. This idea of ED for P, ED for SP, end design for sustainable performance, I think is very useful one. And the SWOT plus, I've used the concept of SWOT myself for many years, but I think the way you're approaching this one is very useful, especially how these different concepts are used at different levels, at the organizational, at the larger level, but also at the individual level. I think that also makes the book quite interesting and useful in a way. So overall, the book provides a comprehensive look at leadership, making an invaluable resource. The fourth thing which I liked also very much is of course, the way you brought this African paradox, the way you call it. Also Ben pointed out on this one, where you have a content which is very rich in natural resources, but also very rich in poverty. So this is quite controversial, and it has remained a puzzle for many scientists. But I think, we go back to the fact that resources alone will never develop you. Having resources is one thing, but what you do with those resources and how you exploit them is very important. And we know that countries like Israel, which are almost resourceless, but highly developed, but the one resource that they have is actually the brain. So at the end of the day, the human resource is probably the most important resource that a country can have. And this is true of Africa. The book argues that having a well-informed and inspired leaders is key to resolving this paradox. Furthermore, the book suggests that long-term planning, similar to that of China, could help African countries to achieve the development goals. This approach could help to ensure that development plans are not short-term and that each leader is held accountable to the same set of long-term goals. The book hopes to provide a pathway to resolving the African paradox using this kind of approach and help African countries to achieve their full potential. In my view, the author's call for well-informed leadership in Africa is a very good one, but it is the one that requires a shift in mindset, really, from many African leaders, but also electorates. I think for too long, politics in Africa and intellectualism have been at odds. I think that in Africa, you are not like to be very successful to become a leader, really, if you base your potential or your strength on intellectualism. So it has always been in antithesis with wanting to become a leader. I think this is also the other one, which is also at odds with the African culture of leadership, is this idea of long-term planning. Because short-termism is actually a norm in Africa. It is a norm in developing cause. So these two aspects, wanting leaders who are informed, who are somewhat intellectual, long-term looking, is very useful. And I think that is what has developed China. Because in China, when I was reading all their leaders, I think one of the factors to become a leader, you have to be intellectually upright. You have to be informed. Actually, even saying that you have to be well educated, which is not the case for many countries in Africa, I would say. Maybe now it is becoming the case. So this requires a change in mindset, and I think it is a very important change that we need to look. Finally, like I said, it is essential that political tradition, the cultures that have come with multipartism, because in Africa, the multipartism that we have has come with a tradition and a culture that once I get into the leadership, my first task is to try to dismantle the previous leader's legacy, to show that the previous regime did very badly. That is the starting point. And then I'm here to rebuild the nation. I think this one is putting us in a very bad vicious cycle of leadership poverty. And I think this is something that the book reminds us when it talks about having that sense of long-term planning. And I wish that leaders could listen to this one, us especially in politics, because our electorate loves that. They love the way we can scorn the previous leaders, the way we can dismantle the legacy of the previous leaders. I think this is a problem that we need to start looking at it, and I think we need to change these traditions. We have to have a different mindset, that we have to have a long-term vision, so that politicians will only differ with respect to tactics, with respect to strategies, but achieving and trying to achieve the same goal, just like they do in China. And this even poses a question whether multi-party democracy in Africa came too early, because we seem to be loving it, but where is it taking us? And if we look at countries like Singapore, China, and many other countries in Asia, they developed while they were not embracing this idea of multi-party democracy. I think these are the notions that we have to begin debating. They're not very good, because you are very easily like to be labeled as wanting dictatorship. You don't like democracy. And in Africa, democracy means having 58 political parties in Nigeria, 20 political parties in Tanzania, and the likes. So I mean, but those are some of the issues that to pose. I wanted to, the last part, of course, as a reviewer, I have to, I mean, everybody who has read the book knows that this book has 5 main parts, and in each part, I like the way they have been organized. You have those like chapters. For example, on part 1, this is where you see the paradox being highlighted, and some of the realities of the African continent, which is very nicely captured there. For example, the fact that this is a very young continent, mean age is only 20, which that presents as both a potential but also a very big risk if it is not very well handled, especially with respect to the kind of education that we're providing to young people in Africa. Again, you see that 18% of the global population is in Africa. And that's the only thing you see about Africa, that we are among the most populous continents. But beyond that, what else can we offer? Look at the GDP. It is nowhere to be seen within the global context. It is, negligible. So, the GDP of the whole of Africa is the wealth of just one of the trillionaires in this world. So these are issues that they're very interesting. Some positive aspects, the linguistic diversity, I think is very unique for Africa. 1,500 languages is not a joke. Emerging opportunities which you have very well captured. This the African Free Continental Free Trade Area. I think is a very, very important vehicle that we have. And I'm happy to read in the book that the way you've captured. When this was being ratified in Tanzania, I was the Minister for Industry, and I was the one which actually presented the parliament. So this is very dear to me, actually. As I said earlier, it is in this chapter that we see these two concepts being introduced, the ED for SP and the thought plus in a way that is very, very well captured. I think what is critical with the ED for SP is that we have to have responsible development. Developing not just for today, we also have to care about the future, about the next generation. I think I like this one very much. On part 2, where we are seeing the first level of leadership, the individual, this is where the complexity of the leadership subject is brought, especially in today's world. What is clear here is that in today's world, really, leaders have to be informed. We have to have informed leadership because the citizens have access to all sorts of information. Unlike during Nyerere's times, Nkrumah's times, where it is only the president who had TV. So the president, the political leaders knew too much, and the citizens knew very little. So leaders were seen to be very intelligent because they had much more access to information than their citizens. But today, my friend, the citizens know almost everything. They know a lot. And sometimes as leaders, we don't even know what is going on in the society. And these guys know. So there's no way. Leaders have to be informed. This is the essence of transformational leadership, which is very well captured in the book. On part 3, this is where we see what the author refers to as performance benchmarks. I like the way it is organized, from having clear goals, ensuring that we are able to monitor, ensuring that we are taking corrective actions, we are communicating effectively, and allocating resources. I think this is also very useful. And I liked the quote that you brought from Colin Powell. Avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. I think the idea of planning to leave when you are in a leadership position is very important. Like when an MP, it's difficult. Like an MP, I should plan to leave my position as an MP. It's difficult, but I think it's very important because you have to know that one day you will have to go and others will have to come. And maintaining that space between your ego and the organizational ego, if you want to put it, I think is critical. So that even when leadership goes, you remain as a person. The idea here, from my own interpretation, that leaders have to continue being human beings. Because one temptation in becoming a leader is you might be taken to the next level, like you are more than a human being, which is a problem. So maintaining that balance, a leader and remaining a human being, I think is very critical. I liked that one. And I think part 4 is, where in the issue of jurisdictions, where we bring in the framework, the African Union 2063 agenda. I liked that one very much because I'm also a Pan-Africanist. So when I was reading this one, I think that we have a framework for development. The African Union has done a very good job in providing that path, and countries could model that one to try to achieving. So I also like that one very much. And the last one is part 5, which is the momentum, where now we are saying you are offering some ideas on how to resolve the paradox of Africa in the spirit of Ubuntu. I think you are raising the issues that constrain the attainment of the African Union 2063 ideas. And then the importance of having scientific leadership, because when you bring in the idea of planning with data, I think that to me that is evidence-based leadership, which is also a problem in Africa. I think in Africa we rely too much on wisdom as a vehicle for leading. I think that in today's world we have to bring in science. people have to make a decision that are based on evidence. I think this is also very, very, very informative. So, I mean, in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that this practical-based leadership guide, I think is very important, is very useful. It has offered some insights that we can use to train yourself to become a leader, especially for young people. This book, if you want to become a leader, I think this could be the starting point. The starting point is read Lucy's book, because it even has some exercises on how you can do to practice some of your skills. I think that is critical. The importance of planning, perseverance, resilience, consistency, leadership, I think is critical. Once again, thank you very much for giving me this very valuable opportunity to read, to review, and talk about this book. I liked it very much. Asante sana.